Roy Tucker's hands tremble as he stares at the alien genitalia displayed on the medical scanner. The Everin diplomat, Flora, stands before him, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with curiosity. Roy's mind races, struggling to process the stark differences between human and Everin anatomy. He never imagined his role as xenobiologist aboard the HSS Horizon would lead to such an intimate encounter. The examination room feels suffocatingly small as Roy clears his throat. "Well, Flora, your physiology is certainly unique," he manages, trying to maintain his professional demeanor. Flora's multiple pairs of eyes blink in rapid succession, her gaze fixed on the visible outline of Roy's genitals through his uniform. "And what of your reproductive organs, Dr. Tucker?" Flora asks, her melodic voice tinged with genuine interest. "They appear quite protuberant." Roy's face flushes as he fumbles for a response. He hadn't prepared for this level of scrutiny. Well, human anatomy is different from Everin in many ways," he begins, reluctantly explaining the basics of human reproductive systems. Flora's eyes widen with each detail, her bioluminescent patches flaring brighter. "Fascinating," she breathes, leaning closer to examine Roy's uniform-clad form. Before Roy can regain his composure, the door to the examination room slides open. Dr. Zara, the stern leader of the Everin scientific delegation, strides in, followed by 4 other female Everin scientists. Their eyes lock onto Roy, a mix of curiosity and something else, something hungry in their gazes. "We demand a full examination of the human specimen," Dr. Zara announces, her tone brooking no argument. "For scientific purposes, of course." Roy backs away, his heart pounding. "Now wait a minute." The ship's intercom crackles to life, interrupting his protest. Captain Sarah Chen's voice fills the room. "Dr. Tucker, I understand your reservations, but we need to maintain good relations with the Everin delegation. Please comply with their request." Trapped between his captain's orders and the eager gazes of the Everin scientists, Roy feels panic rising in his chest. He watches helplessly as Dr. Zara approaches, scanner in hand, her intentions clear. Suddenly, alarms blare throughout the ship. Red emergency lights bathe the examination room in an eerie glow. Captain Chen's voice returns, tight with tension. "All personnel, we are under attack. A rogue faction of Everins has launched an assault on the HSS Horizon. Their goal, to capture the ship and its human crew. This is not a drill. Initiate lockdown procedures immediately." The door to the examination room seals shut with a hiss, trapping Roy with the 5 Everin females. As the ship shudders under the first impacts of the attack, Roy realizes his predicament has gone from uncomfortable to potentially deadly. Dr. Zara's eyes narrow as she turns to Roy, her scanner still humming. "It seems, Dr. Tucker, that your anatomy has become even more valuable. For the sake of Everin science, we must complete our examination, no matter the cost." Roy backs against the wall, his mind racing. He's trapped between curious aliens and hostile invaders, with only his wits and his unusual anatomy to rely on. As the HSS Horizon trembles under another barrage, Roy knows he must find a way out of this situation, not just to save himself, but potentially to save humanity's first contact from turning into its last. Roy's heart pounded as Dr. Zara advanced, her scanner humming ominously. The ship shuddered again, and the red emergency lights cast an eerie glow across the alien faces surrounding him. Before Dr. Zara could reach him, the examination room door hissed shut, sealing them inside. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the intercom once more, her tone urgent. "All personnel, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. Non-combatants seek shelter in designated safe zones." Roy's training kicked in, overriding his panic. He straightened, facing the Everin females. "We need to move. This room isn't safe." Dr. Zara's eyes narrowed. "And why should we trust you, human?" "Because right now, I'm your best chance at survival," Roy replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. He moved to the room's communication panel, punching in his access code. "Bridge, this is Dr. Tucker. I'm trapped in the medical bay with 5 Everin diplomats. What's our status?" Captain Chen's face appeared on the small screen, her expression grim. "Roy, we're under attack by a rogue Everin faction. They've breached the cargo bay. Your priority is to protect the diplomats and get to a secure area if possible. Roy nodded, his mind racing. Understood, Captain. Tucker out. He turned to the Everins, who watched him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. There's a maintenance tunnel behind that panel, he said, pointing to a section of the wall. It should lead us to a safer area of the ship. As Roy pried open the panel, revealing a narrow passage, Flora moved closer to him. Dr. Tucker, I believe you. We should follow your lead. Dr. Zara hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, human. Lead on. Roy squeezed into the tunnel first, the tight space making him acutely aware of Flora's proximity as she followed. The other Everins filed in behind, their bioluminescent skin providing an otherworldly glow in the darkness. As they crawled through the cramped space, the ship rocked with another impact. Roy could hear muffled explosions and the distant sound of energy weapons. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but Flora's presence behind him was distracting. Her breath tickled the back of his neck, and he could feel the warmth radiating from her alien body. Dr. Tucker, Flora whispered, her melodic voice tinged with curiosity, your species seems well prepared for such emergencies. Do you often face such attacks? Roy swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. Not often, no, but we train for all possibilities. They emerged into a dimly lit research lab, startling a lone human woman bent over a workstation. She whirled around, her eyes widening at the sight of Roy crawling out of the wall, followed by 5 alien females. Dr. Petrova, Roy said, recognizing the xenobiologist. We need to get to a secure area. The ship's under attack. Elena Petrova nodded, quickly regaining her composure. There's a secure containment area for dangerous specimens, 2 levels down. It should be safe there. As they moved through the corridors, the ship's artificial gravity began to fluctuate. Roy found himself floating momentarily before being slammed back to the floor. He reached out instinctively, grabbing Flora's arm to steady her. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos around them seemed to fade away. The moment was shattered by a nearby explosion. Roy shook his head, forcing himself to focus. This way, he called, leading the group towards a stairwell. They reached the secure area, only to find the door's locking mechanism sparking and damaged. Roy cursed under his breath, then turned to Elena. We need to get this open. Any ideas? Elena examined the panel, her brow furrowed. I think I can bypass the main circuit, but I'll need help. To Roy's surprise, Flora stepped forward. I would like to assist. Perhaps I can learn something about your technology in the process. As they worked, Roy could hear the sounds of battle growing closer. He caught snippets of comm chatter, realizing with a chill that the attackers were searching for human specimens to capture. Finally, the door slid open with a groan. They hurried inside, Roy sealing the door behind them just as a group of armed Everins rounded the corner. Open this door, human, a deep voice commanded. Surrender yourself, and the others will be spared. Roy's mind raced. They were trapped. But at least they were safe for the moment. He turned to the others, his gaze lingering on Flora. We need a plan, he said, his voice low. And I think I have an idea. As Roy began to outline his thoughts, he couldn't help but notice the way Flora was looking at him. Despite the dire situation, he felt a flutter in his chest. Whatever happened next, he knew this encounter had changed him forever. Roy's mind raced as he considered their options. The secure area provided temporary safety, but they couldn't stay there indefinitely. He turned to the others, his gaze lingering on Flora for a moment before addressing the group. We need to act fast, Roy said, his voice low and urgent. I have an idea, but it's risky. Dr. Zara stepped forward, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with intensity. What do you propose, human? Roy quickly outlined his plan, explaining how they could use the lab's equipment to create a high-frequency sonic device that would exploit a weakness in Everin physiology. Dr. Zara's eyes widened with understanding. Clever, she admitted grudgingly. Our auditory organs are indeed sensitive to certain frequencies. But can you construct such a device quickly enough? Roy nodded, already moving towards a nearby workstation. With your help, I think we can. Dr. Petrova, can you assist us? As they worked feverishly to assemble the device, the sounds of the rogue Everins attempting to breach the door grew louder. Flora stood watch, her eyes darting nervously between Roy and the sealed entrance. "Roy," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "What if this doesn't work?" Roy paused in his work, meeting her gaze. "It has to," he replied simply. Just as they finished calibrating the device, a loud boom echoed through the room. The door buckled inward, sparks flying as the locking mechanism failed. Roy gripped the sonic emitter tightly, his finger hovering over the activation switch. The door burst open, revealing Commander Zan and his team of rogue Everans. Their weapons were raised, eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Surrender now, humans," Zan bellowed. "Resistance is—" Roy activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, inaudible to human ears, but devastatingly effective against the Everans. Zan and his team collapsed, writhing in agony as their sensitive auditory organs were overwhelmed by the sonic assault. "Now!" Roy shouted, gesturing for the others to follow him. They rushed past the incapacitated Everans, with Flora helping Roy carry the sonic device. As they navigated the ship's corridors, they encountered more rogue Everans. Each time, Roy activated the device, leaving a trail of stunned attackers in their wake. Flora stayed close to Roy, her combat instincts kicking in as she helped clear their path. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of human crew members led by Lieutenant Jack Harper, the ship's tactical officer. Harper's eyes widened at the sight of Roy and the Everan diplomats. "Dr. Tucker, thank God you're alive," Harper said, lowering his weapon. "We've got a situation. The rogues have taken control of engineering and are trying to override our systems." Roy quickly briefed Harper on their makeshift weapon and their encounters so far. The lieutenant nodded grimly. "Good work, Doctor. We need to split up. My team will head for the bridge to support the captain. You should get the diplomats to the shuttle bay in case we need to evacuate." As they parted ways, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. He led his group towards the shuttle bay, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They were halfway there when a group of heavily armed rogue Everans ambushed them. Energy weapons flared to life, filling the corridor with searing light. Roy dove for cover, but not before a blast grazed his arm, leaving a painful burn. He gritted his teeth against the pain, reaching for the sonic device. But before he could activate it, Flora sprang into action. With a grace and speed Roy hadn't expected, she disarmed one of the attackers and turned their own weapon against them. "Roy!" she called out, tossing him the captured weapon. Together they managed to fend off the assault, leaving the rogue Everans unconscious or fleeing. As the adrenaline faded, Roy became acutely aware of the burning pain in his arm. Flora approached him, her eyes filled with concern. "You're injured," she said softly, examining the energy burn on his arm. Her touch was gentle, sending an unexpected shiver through Roy's body. "I'm fine," he assured her, trying to ignore the strange mix of pain and pleasure her touch evoked. "We need to keep moving." They reached the shuttle bay, only to find it partially damaged from the initial attack. Roy immediately set to work on repairing one of the shuttles, with Flora eagerly assisting him. As they worked side by side in the cramped shuttle interior, Roy became increasingly aware of Flora's presence. The scent of her alien skin, the warmth radiating from her body, the graceful movements of her multiple limbs, it all combined to create a heady distraction. Flora seemed equally affected, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with increased frequency whenever their hands brushed against each other. The tension between them grew, thick and palpable in the confined space. Suddenly, Dr. Zara's voice broke the moment. "Dr. Tucker, I've found something." Roy reluctantly pulled away from Flora, turning to see Dr. Zara examining a communication device she'd taken from one of the incapacitated rogues. Her expression was grim as she relayed the information she'd decrypted. "This attack is part of a larger plot," she explained, her voice tight with anger and disbelief. "A radical faction among our people seeks to capture humans for biological experimentation. This goes against everything we stand for." The revelation sent a chill through the group. The other Everan diplomats murmured in shock and dismay, while Roy felt a renewed sense of urgency. Before he could respond, the ship lurched violently. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending everyone floating momentarily before slamming them back to the ground. Roy found himself pressed against Flora, their bodies entangled in a way that sent his heart racing. As they disentangled themselves, Roy's comm unit crackled to life. Captain Chen's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Dr. Tucker, we have a critical situation. The rogues are using our weapons to attack the Everin homeworld. We need to stop them immediately, or we'll have a full-scale war on our hands." Roy's mind raced, quickly formulating a plan. "Captain, I think I can get to engineering through the shuttle bay. We can bypass their defenses from the outside." There was a moment of silence before Chen replied. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot. Do it, Dr. Tucker. The fate of both our species may depend on it." As Roy prepared the shuttle for launch, Flora approached him. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "You'll need my knowledge of Everin technology." Roy wanted to protest to keep her safe, but he knew she was right. He nodded, accepting her offer. As they boarded the shuttle, Dr. Zara called out to them. "We'll do everything in our power to prevent war, should you succeed. Good luck, both of you." With a final nod to the others, Roy sealed the shuttle door. As he initiated the launch sequence, he glanced at Flora, seeing his own mix of fear and willpower reflected in her alien eyes. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the star-filled expanse of space. With a deep breath, Roy guided the shuttle out into the void, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and to confront the growing feelings between him and his alien companion. As the shuttle cleared the bay doors, Roy's grip tightened on the controls, his eyes scanning the star-filled expanse before them. "Hold on," he warned Flora, his voice tense. "This might get rough." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the shuttle rocked violently. A barrage of energy blasts lit up the space around them, creating a deadly light show against the backdrop of stars. "Rogue Everin fighters!" Flora exclaimed, her bioluminescent patches pulsing rapidly with alarm. Roy's hands flew across the controls, sending the shuttle into a series of sharp turns and dives. The small craft bucked and shuddered under the strain, but Roy's piloting skills kept them one step ahead of the enemy fire. "Flora, can you access their systems from here?" Roy asked, his voice strained as he executed another evasive maneuver. Flora's multiple limbs worked in perfect synchronization as she interfaced with the shuttle's computer. "I believe so. Their technology is similar to ours. If I can just—" Her voice trailed off as she concentrated, her alien features set in perseverance. Suddenly, the incoming fire became erratic, the energy blasts flying wide of their mark. "I've managed to jam their targeting systems," Flora announced, a note of pride in her voice. "It won't last long, but it should give us an advantage." Roy nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Nice work. Let's make it count." He pushed the shuttle's engines to their limit, weaving through the debris field surrounding the HSS horizon. Twisted metal and shattered hull plates became obstacles and shields, as Roy used every bit of cover to their advantage. As they approached the engineering deck, Roy's keen eyes spotted a weakness in the ship's hull, a gaping wound left by the initial attack. "There," he said, pointing. "That's our way in." Flora's eyes widened as she realized his plan. "A controlled breach? Roy, that's incredibly dangerous." "So is everything else about this mission," Roy replied, his face hardened. "We don't have time for subtlety." He angled the shuttle towards the damaged section of hull, calculating their approach with split-second precision. The impact sent shockwaves through the small craft, alarms blaring as the cabin began to depressurize. "Emergency suits now!" Roy shouted, already reaching for his own. They donned the suits with practiced efficiency, the hiss of oxygen filling their helmets just as the last of the shuttle's atmosphere vented into space. Roy met Flora's eyes through their faceplates, seeing his own purpose mirrored there. "Ready?" he asked. Flora nodded, her alien features set in a look of grit that transcended species. Together, they made their way through the shuttle's airlock and out into the void of space. The breach in the horizon's hull loomed before them, a jagged maw of twisted metal and sparking wires. Roy led the way, using his suit's maneuvering thrusters to guide them through the opening and into the chaos of the engineering deck. The scene that greeted them was one of barely controlled mayhem. Consoles sparked and sputtered, casting eerie shadows across the deck. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, causing loose objects to float momentarily before crashing back to the floor. Roy's eyes quickly scanned the area, assessing the situation. A group of human engineers huddled in a corner, surrounded by armed Everin guards. The rogue alien's attention was focused on the hostages, giving Roy and Flora a moment to plan. "We need to free them," Roy whispered, his voice barely audible over the comm link. "I have an idea, but I need you to create a distraction." Flora nodded, understanding immediately. "I can do that." Without warning, Flora's bioluminescent patches began to pulse with increasing intensity. The light grew brighter and brighter, a dazzling display that drew the attention of every Everan in the room. The rogue aliens shield their eyes, momentarily blinded by the unexpected light show. Roy seized the opportunity, launching himself towards the nearest guard. He tackled the disoriented Everan, wresting the energy weapon from its grasp. In one fluid motion, he turned and fired, disarming a second guard before they could react. The engineering deck erupted into chaos. Roy tossed one of the captured weapons to the nearest human engineer, shouting, "Help us fight!" The freed hostages didn't need to be told twice. They joined the fray, turning the tables on their captors. Roy and Flora moved in perfect sync, covering each other as they advanced across the deck. Flora's natural agility combined with Roy's tactical knowledge made them a formidable team. As the last of the rogue Everins fell, Roy made his way to a nearby console. His fingers flew across the alien interface, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I've managed to restore partial control to the bridge," he announced, "but the main reactor is still under their control." Before Flora could respond, a chilling voice echoed through the engineering deck's comm system. "Surrender now, humans, or we'll overload the reactor. Your ship, your crew, and your pitiful alliance will be nothing but atoms scattered across space." Flora's face paled, her bioluminescent patches dimming with shock. "That voice, I know it. It's Commander Zan." Roy turned to her, his expression grim. "Who is he?" "A notorious extremist," Flora explained, her voice tight with anger and shame. "He believes in Everin superiority and has long opposed any alliance with humans. If he's behind this—" Roy nodded, understanding the implications. "Then capturing him could be the key to ending this conflict and clearing your people of involvement." They shared a look of purpose, both knowing what needed to be done. Roy gestured towards a narrow maintenance shaft leading towards the reactor control room. "That's our best bet for a surprise approach," he said. "It'll be tight, but it should get us close enough to make a move." As they entered the cramped shaft, Roy couldn't help but be acutely aware of Flora's proximity. In the confined space, he could feel the warmth radiating from her alien body, smell the strange but not unpleasant scent of her skin. Their eyes met for a moment, and Roy felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the malfunctioning systems around them. Forcing himself to focus on the task at hand, Roy outlined his plan as they crawled through the shaft. "We'll use the ship's coolant system to incapacitate them. It's risky. Anyone caught in the spray could suffer severe hypothermia, but it's our best shot at taking them by surprise." Flora nodded, trusting Roy's judgment despite the danger. As they neared the end of the shaft, they could hear voices ahead, rogue Everins discussing their plans for the captured humans. Roy's mind focused at their callous words, strengthening his dedication. They emerged from the shaft to find themselves face to face with a heavily armed Everin guard. For a split second, time seemed to stand still as both parties registered the unexpected encounter. Then, in a move that spoke of their growing trust and teamwork, Roy and Flora acted as one. Roy lunged forward, drawing the guard's attention with a feint to the left. As the Everin turned to face him, Flora struck from behind, using a combination of her natural agility and newly learned human combat moves to disarm and subdue the guard. With the path clear, Roy made his way to the coolant control station. He met Flora's eyes one last time, seeing his own willpower reflected there. With a deep breath, he initiated the coolant purge. A wave of frigid mist flooded the reactor room, accompanied by the surprised shouts of the rogue Everins. Roy and Flora, protected by their spacesuits, rushed into the room. The scene before them was one of icy chaos. Rogue Everins lay incapacitated on the floor, their bodies covered in a layer of frost. At the center of it all stood Commander Zan, his eyes filled with hatred as he struggled against the effects of the cold. Roy approached him cautiously, energy weapon raised. "It's over, Zan," Roy declared. "Surrender now." As Zan's knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor, Roy and Flora shared a moment of relief. They had done it, the ship was saved, and with it, the chance for peace between their species. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Captain Chen and Security Chief Wolf burst into the room, their weapons at the ready. Seeing the situation under control, they lowered their arms. "Dr. Tucker, Flora," Captain Chen said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and admiration. "You've saved us all." As the adrenaline of their success began to fade, Roy became acutely aware of Flora's presence beside him. The attraction between them, built on shared danger and growing trust, seemed to crackle in the air. They turned to face each other, drawn together by a force neither fully understood. For a moment, it seemed as if they might kiss, the tension between them nearly palpable. But the arrival of the captain and security chief broke the spell, reminding them of the complex reality they faced. As they began to process the events of the day, Roy and Flora realized that their actions had not only saved the ship, but potentially prevented an interspecies war. However, as they looked at the incapacitated rogue Everans and the damage done to the ship, they knew that the challenges ahead, both political and personal, were a long way to go. Captain Chen's voice cut through their thoughts. "We need to secure the prisoners and assess the damage. Dr. Tucker, Flora, I'll need a full report on what happened here." Roy nodded, his mind already racing with the implications of their actions. As he and Flora followed the captain out of the reactor room, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held, for the alliance between their species and for the two of them. The moment between Roy and Flora lingered, unspoken but palpable, as they followed Captain Chen out of the reactor room. In the days that followed, the HSS Horizon buzzed with activity as the crew worked to repair the damage and secure the captured rogue Everans. Roy and Flora found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of debriefings, interviews, and medical examinations. Captain Chen called an emergency meeting in the ship's main conference room, gathering human leadership and Everan diplomats to address the recent events. Roy's heart raced as he and Flora entered the room, feeling the weight of every eye upon them. The captain's voice cut through the tense silence. "Dr. Tucker, Flora, please take a seat. We need your first-hand account of what transpired during the crisis." Roy cleared his throat, acutely aware of Flora's presence beside him. "Captain, honored delegates, what we experienced was extraordinary. The rogue Everans posed a significant threat, but through our combined efforts, we were able to overcome them." As Roy recounted their actions, from the desperate shuttle flight to the final confrontation in the reactor room, he emphasized the seamless cooperation between himself and Flora. "We couldn't have succeeded alone," he concluded, glancing at his alien companion. "Our different strengths and perspectives were crucial." Flora nodded, her bioluminescent patches pulsing softly. "Roy speaks the truth. Our ability to trust and rely on each other, despite our differences, was key to our survival and success." The room fell silent as the assembled delegates processed their words. Suddenly, Dr. Zara stood up, her face grave. "I have decrypted the communications from the rogue Everans," she announced. "Their plans went beyond mere sabotage. They intended to use humans for biological experimentation." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The Everan diplomats looked horrified, while several human officers clenched their fists in anger. Captain Chen raised her hands, calling for calm. "This information is shocking, but we must not let it derail the progress we've made. Dr. Tucker and Flora have shown us what's possible when we work together." As the debate intensified, Roy found himself drawn into a heated discussion with a group of human and Everan scientists. Dr. Xander Voss, a brilliant but eccentric researcher, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Dr. Tucker, your experience with Flora raises fascinating questions about human-Everan compatibility. We must study this further." Before Roy could respond, Captain Chen's voice cut through the chatter. "Dr. Tucker, Flora, please report to Medbay immediately. Dr. Patel needs to conduct a thorough examination to ensure there are no lasting effects from your ordeal." In the sterile confines of the Medbay, Roy and Flora underwent a battery of tests under Dr. Patel's watchful eye. As the chief medical officer analyzed the results, her brow furrowed with growing interest. "This is remarkable," Dr. Patel murmured, studying a holographic display of their bioreadings. "Roy, your body is showing signs of adapting to Flora's pheromones. And Flora, your bioluminescent patterns have subtly shifted to match Roy's biorhythms." Roy and Flora exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and something deeper passing between them. Dr. Patel continued, her voice filled with scientific excitement. "These changes suggest a level of biological compatibility we've never observed before between humans and everins." As news of their unique physiological changes spread, Roy and Flora found themselves thrust into the spotlight once again. Dr. Voss approached Captain Chen with a proposal for a comprehensive study on human-everin interactions, with Roy and Flora as the primary subjects. The captain called them to her ready room, her face a mask of concern. "I'm assigning you both to a special joint research team," she explained. "We need to understand these changes and their implications. However, your safety and comfort are paramount. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, say the word and we'll halt the study." Roy nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. He glanced at Flora, seeing his own emotions mirrored in her alien features. As they left the captain's ready room, Roy couldn't help but notice how close Flora walked beside him, their arms nearly touching. The following weeks were a blur of tests, experiments, and long hours spent in close proximity. Roy found himself hyper-aware of Flora's presence, the subtle shifts in her bioluminescence, the alien grace of her movements, the indescribable scent that seemed to call to something deep within him. One evening, as they prepared for another round of tests, Roy caught Flora's gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Flora took a step closer, her voice low and melodious. "Roy, Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom, urgent and commanding. "All hands to battle stations. We've detected multiple unidentified vessels on an intercept course." Roy and Flora sprang into action, their moment of connection broken but not forgotten. As they raced towards the bridge, Roy's mind whirled with possibilities. Were these ships friendly or hostile? Could they be reinforcements for the rogue Everins? As the HSS Horizon prepared for potential conflict, Roy realized that the challenges they faced extended far beyond the scientific mysteries of their unique bond. Whatever lay ahead, he knew that he and Flora would face it together, their connection a bridge between two species in a vast and dangerous universe. As Roy and Flora arrived on the bridge, the tension was palpable. Captain Chen stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the approaching vessels. "Status report," she barked. "5 unidentified ships, Captain," replied the tactical officer. "They're not responding to our hails." Roy felt Flora tense beside him, her bioluminescent patches pulsing rapidly. He instinctively moved closer, their shoulders almost touching. The captain noticed their arrival and beckoned them over. "Dr. Tucker, Flora, I need your insights," she said, her voice low. "Could these be related to the rogue Everins?" Before they could respond, Dr. Xander Voss burst onto the bridge, his wild hair even more disheveled than usual. "Captain, we can't let this interrupt our research. The physiological changes in Dr. Tucker and Flora are progressing at an unprecedented rate." Captain Chen's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Voss, this is hardly the time." "On the contrary," Voss interrupted, his eyes gleaming with scientific fervor. "Their unique bond could be crucial in this situation. I propose we continue our studies, even under these circumstances." The captain hesitated, clearly torn between the immediate threat and the potential long-term benefits of the research. After a moment, she nodded. "Very well, but safety is our priority. Dr. Tucker, Flora, are you willing to continue participating in Dr. Voss's study?" Roy and Flora exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. "We are, Captain," Roy answered for both of them. Over the next few days, as the HSS Horizon cautiously approached the unidentified vessels, Roy and Flora found themselves at the center of an intense scientific study. Dr. Voss designed a series of experiments that required them to spend extended periods in close proximity, often in specially designed isolation chambers. During one particularly lengthy experiment, Roy and Flora were confined to a small habitat module for 72 hours. The close quarters intensified their emotional connection, and as they underwent various physical and mental tests, their bodies continued to adapt to each other's presence. Roy noticed that Flora's bioluminescent patterns had begun to pulse in sync with his heartbeat. He found it mesmerizing, watching the soft glow ebb and flow in time with his own life rhythm. For her part, Flora seemed increasingly attuned to Roy's emotional state, responding to subtle changes in his mood before he even realized them himself. As the third day of their confinement neared its end, Roy felt a sudden wave of dizziness. He stumbled, reaching out to steady himself against the wall of the module. Flora was at his side in an instant, her cool hand on his forehead. "Your temperature is elevated," she said, her voice tinged with concern. To Roy's amazement, Flora's bioluminescent patches began to emit a soothing, cooling light. The effect was immediate, bringing his temperature back to normal and clearing the fog from his mind. "How did you do that?" Roy asked, awestruck. Flora seemed equally surprised. I'm not sure. It just happened." Their moment of wonder was interrupted by Dr. Voss's voice over the intercom. "Fascinating. Your bodies are developing symbiotic responses to each other's needs. This is beyond anything we could have predicted." As they exited the habitat module, they found Captain Chen waiting for them, her face grave. "We've received an urgent transmission from Everin High Command," she informed them. "There's unusual activity near a remote outpost on the moon of Iverta Prime. They fear it might be connected to the radical faction that attacked us." Roy felt a surge of adrenaline, sensing that their newfound abilities might soon be put to the test. Captain Chen continued, "I'm assembling a joint human-Everin team to investigate, and I want you both on it. Your unique abilities could be invaluable in the field." As preparations for the mission began, Dr. Voss insisted on continuing his research under field conditions. He outfitted Roy and Flora with advanced biosensors, much to the annoyance of some crew members who viewed it as an unnecessary complication. The investigation team departed for the Everin moon in a specially equipped shuttle. During the journey, Roy experienced another spike in his body temperature, this time more severe. Without hesitation, Flora's bioluminescent patches emitted the cooling light, saving Roy from potential heat stroke caused by a malfunction in his environmental suit. The incident demonstrated the potential benefits of their evolving biology, but also raised concerns about their increasing codependence. Roy caught several worried glances from their teammates, and he couldn't help but share their unease. What were he and Flora becoming? And what would it mean for their future? As the shuttle approached the Everin moon, Roy pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the mission ahead. The barren, crater-pocked surface loomed before them, holding secrets that could change the course of human-Everin relations forever. The shuttle touched down near the coordinates of the suspected activity. As the team disembarked, Roy and Flora took point, their heightened senses alert for any sign of danger. They moved across the lunar landscape, their steps light in the low gravity, until they came upon what appeared to be an abandoned research facility hidden beneath the surface. Roy felt a chill run down his spine as they entered the underground complex. Something about this place felt wrong, a sentiment he could sense Flora shared through their deepening connection. As they explored deeper into the facility, the true nature of what had occurred here began to reveal itself. In a vast laboratory, they discovered evidence of illegal genetic experiments combining human and Everin DNA. The implications were horrifying, sending shockwaves through both the human and Everin members of the team. Roy felt sick as he examined the data logs, detailing failed experiments and the suffering of test subjects. Flora placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We need to document everything," she said softly. "This cannot be allowed to continue." As they moved to the central laboratory to gather more evidence, Roy's foot caught on a hidden pressure plate. A loud click echoed through the room, and before they could react, a transparent barrier slammed down, sealing Roy and Flora inside a containment chamber. Panic rose in Roy's chest as a hissing sound filled the air. An unknown gaseous substance began to fill the chamber, its sickly green color ominous in the harsh laboratory lights. With no other choice, they were forced to remove their protective gear. As the gas enveloped them, Roy felt a strange tingling sensation across his skin. He looked down in shock to see a faint bioluminescent glow spreading across his body. Beside him, Flora gasped for air, then began to breathe more easily as her respiratory system adapted to process oxygen more efficiently. Outside the chamber, their teammates worked frantically to free them, but the containment systems were proving difficult to override. Through the transparent barrier, Roy could see Dr. Voss frantically examining the readouts from their biosensors, his face a mask of both concern and scientific fascination. As the minutes ticked by, Roy became aware of a new sensation. Fragmented memories and emotions that were not his own began to flash through his mind. He saw glimpses of Flora's childhood on Evora, felt the exhilaration of her first space flight, experienced her fear and commitment during the rogue Everin attack. "Flora," he whispered, turning to face her. I can see your memories." Her eyes widened in understanding. "And I can see yours." Their mental connection deepened, allowing them to share knowledge and skills. Together, they began to search for an escape route, their combined expertise giving them insights that neither would have had alone. Just as they discovered a potential weakness in the containment field, an alarm blared throughout the facility. The fail-safe mechanism had triggered a self-destruct sequence. They had only minutes to escape before the entire complex would implode. Using their newfound connection, Roy and Flora worked in perfect synchronization to guide their team through the crumbling facility. As the structure began to collapse around them, they sprinted for the exit, debris raining down from above. They burst out onto the lunar surface just as the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The team raced for the shuttle, leaping inside as the facility imploded behind them, sending a plume of dust and debris into the airless sky. As the shuttle lifted off, Roy and Flora collapsed into their seats, physically and mentally exhausted. The adrenaline of their escape began to fade, replaced by the realization of how profoundly they had changed. Their bodies and minds were now intricately linked in ways they were only beginning to understand. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comm system. "Team, report status." As Roy opened his mouth to respond, he caught Flora's eye. In that moment, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever consequences their transformation might bring, they would face them together. The bond between them was no longer just a scientific curiosity or a tactical advantage. It had become the core of who they were. The shuttle streaked away from the Everin moon, carrying with it evidence that would shake the foundations of human-Everin relations. As they began the journey back to the HS horizon, Roy and Flora sat side by side, their hands intertwined, their newly shared consciousness buzzing with the implications of what they had discovered and what they had become. The bond between them was no longer just a scientific curiosity or a tactical advantage. It had become the core of who they were. As the shuttle docked with the HSS Horizon, Roy felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He stumbled, nearly falling as he exited the craft. Flora caught him, her cool touch steadying him, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice strained. Before Roy could respond, Dr. Voss rushed forward, his eyes wide as he examined the readouts on his handheld scanner. "We need to get you both to medical immediately," he said, his voice urgent. Captain Chen, who had been waiting to debrief the team, took one look at Roy and Flora and nodded. "Agreed. Dr. Voss, take them to sickbay. I'll contact Earth Command." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Roy's vision began to blur. He could feel Flora's growing distress through their mental link, her fear mingling with his own. By the time they reached sickbay, both Roy and Flora were barely conscious. The next few hours passed in a haze of medical scans, hushed conversations, and a growing sense of urgency. Roy drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of worried discussions between Dr. Voss and the ship's medical team. "Their physiologies are becoming dangerously intertwined," he heard Dr. Voss say at one point. "We need to stabilize them before—" The rest of the sentence was lost as Roy slipped back into unconsciousness. When he next opened his eyes, Roy found himself in a sterile white room, surrounded by unfamiliar medical equipment. Flora lay in a bed next to his, her skin pale and her bioluminescent patches pulsing weakly. A woman in a white lab coat approached, her face kind but serious. Dr. Tucker, I'm Dr. Elena Petrova. You're in the Interspecies Medical Research Center in Geneva. We've been working around the clock to stabilize your condition. Roy tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Dr. Petrova offered him a sip of water before continuing. You and Flora were transferred here directly from the HSS Horizon. Earth Command issued an urgent recall order when they learned of your unique situation. As Roy's mind cleared, he became aware of a commotion outside the room. He could hear raised voices and what sounded like chanting. Dr. Petrova's expression tightened. I'm afraid news of your condition has spread. There are protesters outside the facility. Some are calling for an end to all human-Everin interactions, while others are demanding increased cooperation. It's become quite a political firestorm. Roy's heart sank. He hadn't considered the wider implications of what had happened to him and Flora. Through their mental link, he could sense Flora's growing awareness and her shared concern. Before he could ask any questions, the door opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking Everin entered. Dr. Petrova turned to greet her. Roy, Flora, this is Dr. Lasara, the top geneticist sent by the Everin High Council to assist with your case. Dr. Lasara approached, her movements graceful despite the gravity difference. I've brought a prototype genetic stabilizer, she said, her voice melodious but tinged with worry. It may help separate your merged physiologies, but I must warn you, it's untested on human subjects. Roy could sense the tension in the room, the unspoken concerns about using Everin technology on a human. He reached out mentally to Flora, seeking her thoughts. We have to try, she communicated silently. But I'm afraid, Roy, what if it separates us completely? Roy shared her fear. The thought of losing their connection was terrifying, but he knew they couldn't remain in this unstable state. As the medical team prepared to test the genetic stabilizer, Roy became acutely aware of the changes in his body. His skin had developed a faint luminescence, similar to Flora's bioluminescent patches. His senses felt sharper, more attuned to his surroundings. Through their link, he could feel Flora's body adapting as well. Her respiratory system had shifted, becoming more efficient at processing oxygen-rich air. It was as if their bodies were trying to find a balance between human and Everin physiology. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Petrova rushed to a communication panel, her face paling as she listened to the incoming message. We have a security breach, she announced, her voice tense. A group calling themselves the Terran Purity Front is attempting to infiltrate the facility. The rest of her words were drowned out by the sound of an explosion. The room shook and Roy could hear shouts and the sound of running feet in the corridor outside. In that moment, Roy and Flora's shared consciousness kicked into high gear. Without speaking, they began to move in perfect synchronization. Roy disconnected the monitoring equipment while Flora disabled the door lock, both of them drawing on knowledge and skills that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As they prepared to face whatever threat lay beyond the door, Roy caught Flora's eye. In that silent exchange, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to facing whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The door slid open, revealing a corridor filled with smoke and chaos. Roy and Flora stepped out, their hybrid physiology humming with nervous energy, ready to confront not just the immediate danger, but the uncertain future that awaited them in a world struggling to understand and accept their unprecedented transformation. Transformation. The smoke-filled corridor stretched before them, a gauntlet of chaos and danger. Roy and Flora moved as one, their shared consciousness guiding their steps through the mayhem. As they navigated the chaos, alarms blaring and people shouting, Roy felt a surge of dizziness. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Flora steadied him, her touch cool against his feverish skin. We need to find Dr. Petrova, Flora said, her voice tight with concern. Our condition is deteriorating. They pushed forward, using their heightened senses to avoid the worst of the chaos. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Dr. Voss, who was rushing towards them with a team of medical personnel. Thank goodness you're all right, Dr. Voss said, his face etched with worry. We need to get you back to a secure area immediately. Your physiological changes are accelerating at an alarming rate. As they hurried back to a fortified section of the facility, Roy became acutely aware of the changes in his body. His skin tingled, the bioluminescent patches pulsing with an otherworldly glow. Through their mental link, he could sense Flora's own transformations, her bones shifting, becoming denser yet more flexible. They reached a reinforced medical bay where Dr. Petrova and Dr. Lasara were waiting. The room buzzed with tense energy as the medical team quickly hooked Roy and Flora up to an array of monitoring equipment. "We've made a critical discovery," Dr. Voss announced, his eyes alight with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Your hybrid DNA is exhibiting remarkable regenerative properties. It's unlike anything we've seen in either human or ever in biology." As the implications of this revelation sank in, Roy and Flora found themselves thrust into an intense internal debate. Their shared consciousness became a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, each considering the ramifications of their condition. "We could help so many people with this ability," Flora's thoughts echoed in Roy's mind. "But at what cost?" Roy countered. "We're losing ourselves. Our individual identities are blurring." Their silent exchange was interrupted by Dr. Petrova. "We have a decision to make," she said, her voice grave. "Dr. Lasara has brought a prototype genetic stabilizer. It may be able to separate your merged physiologies, but it's untested on humans." The room fell silent as the weight of the decision settled upon them. Roy could feel the conflicting desires warring within both himself and Flora, the fear of losing their unique connection battling against the need to regain their individual selves. Before they could respond, the door burst open. Ambassador Marcus Wayland strode in, followed closely by Counselor Thera. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. "We need to discuss the implications of your condition," Wayland said, his voice tight. "The human government is concerned about maintaining the genetic integrity of our species. They're pushing for separation." Counselor Thera stepped forward, her luminescent eyes fixed on Roy and Flora. "The Everin High Council sees things differently. We believe this could be a step towards evolutionary advancement for both our peoples." As the political representatives argued, Roy became aware of a commotion outside. Through the reinforced windows, he could see crowds gathering, their chants muffled but still audible. "The evolutionary progressives," Dr. Petrova explained, noticing Roy's attention. "They're demanding you be allowed to remain in your hybrid state. Things are getting volatile out there." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Captain Sarah Chen's voice came over the intercom, urgent and commanding. "Security breach. All personnel, enact lockdown procedures immediately. We have hostile infiltrators in the building." The medical bay erupted into action. As staff rushed to secure the room, Roy and Flora shared a look of understanding. Without a word, they began to move in perfect synchronization, drawing on their shared knowledge and newfound abilities. Roy concentrated, finding he could control the intensity and color of his bioluminescent patches. He created a disorienting pattern of flashing lights, making it difficult for anyone to enter the room without being momentarily blinded. Flora, her body humming with newfound strength, began moving heavy equipment to barricade the door. The others in the room watched in amazement as she effortlessly lifted items that would normally require multiple people to move. As they fortified their position, explosions rocked the building. The lights flickered, and the steady hum of the life support systems faltered. "The quarantine field is failing," Dr. Voss shouted over the chaos. "We need to stabilize them now, or we may lose the chance entirely." In that moment, as the world seemed to crumble around them, Roy and Flora made their decision. Their shared consciousness buzzed with a mix of fear, grit, and hope. "We'll do it," they said in unison, their voices blending in an otherworldly harmony. The modified stabilization procedure. We want to keep our connection, but we need to regain some of our individuality. Dr. Petrova and Dr. Lasara sprang into action, prepping the genetic stabilizer as Captain Chen's voice crackled over the intercom once more, reporting fierce fighting throughout the facility. As they were rushed towards the procedure room, Roy and Flora clung to each other, their hybrid physiology humming with nervous energy. The corridor outside was a battleground, the sounds of energy weapons and shouts echoing through the halls. They reached the procedure room just as another explosion rocked the building. Debris rained down from the ceiling and the lights flickered ominously. Dr. Voss and his team worked feverishly to set up the equipment, their movements urgent and precise. Roy and Flora were quickly prepped and placed into the stabilization chamber. As the transparent dome closed over them, they reached for each other's hands, their fingers intertwining. "Whatever happens," Roy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we face it together." Flora nodded, her bioluminescent patches pulsing in sync with Roy's. "Always," she replied. As Dr. Voss initiated the stabilization sequence, the room shook with another explosion. Alarms blared, warning of critical system failures throughout the facility. The fate of Roy and Flora, and perhaps the future of human-Everin relations, hung in the balance as the genetic stabilizer hummed to life, its energy enveloping the hybrid couple in a cocoon of shimmering light. Light. The energy pulsed through the chamber, enveloping Roy and Flora in a cocoon of swirling, iridescent particles. Their hands clasped tightly, their bodies began to shimmer and blur at the edges. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The lights flickered, and alarms blared with renewed intensity. Dr. Voss stumbled, catching himself on the control panel. His eyes widened in horror as he saw the readings spike erratically. "Power surge!" he shouted. "The stabilizer is overloading!" The machine hummed ominously, its pitch rising to a painful whine. Inside the chamber, Roy and Flora's bodies began to change rapidly. Their forms shifted and merged, skin rippling like water. Flora's bioluminescent patches spread across Roy's body, while his human features blended into her Everin physiology. Dr. Petrova rushed to the controls, her fingers flying over the interface. "We're losing containment. The hybridization process is accelerating." Through the transparent dome, they watched as Roy and Flora's bodies continued to meld together. Their separate forms became increasingly indistinct, merging into a single shimmering entity. Outside the procedure room, the sounds of battle intensified. Energy weapons discharged, and the shouts of Captain Chen's security forces echoed through the corridors, the air filled with the acrid smell of smoke and ozone. Inside the chamber, Roy and Flora's consciousness expanded dramatically. Their shared mind reached out, touching the thoughts of those around them. They became acutely aware of the chaos engulfing the facility, sensing the positions of both allies and infiltrators. Without speaking, they projected a stream of tactical information to Captain Chen. The security chief's voice crackled over the intercom. "All units, adjust formation. We've got intel on the hostiles' locations." The tide of the battle began to turn as Chen's forces used the unexpected advantage to outmaneuver the infiltrators. Meanwhile, the hybridization process reached its climax. A blinding flash of light erupted from the chamber, forcing everyone in the room to shield their eyes. When the glare faded, they gaped at the sight before them. Where Roy and Flora had been, a single being now floated in the chamber. It was neither fully human nor entirely Everin, but a perfect blend of both species. Its skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, and its body displayed a harmonious mix of human and Everin characteristics. The being opened its eyes, revealing irises that swirled with an otherworldly combination of colors. Dr. Voss approached the chamber cautiously. "Roy? Flora? Can you hear me?" The being's voice resonated with a dual timbre, both familiar and alien. "We are here, Dr. Voss. But we are no longer Roy and Flora. We are Rora." As Rora spoke, the remaining infiltrators burst into the room, weapons raised. Without hesitation, Rora's form blurred into motion. Moving with inhuman speed and grace, it disarmed the attackers with a series of fluid movements. The infiltrators found themselves suddenly immobilized, their minds overwhelmed by Rora's telepathic influence. Captain Chen and her team arrived moments later, securing the subdued infiltrators. Chen stared at Rora in amazement. What are you?" Rora turned its gaze to the security chief. "We are the bridge between human and Everin, and we sense the facility is in danger of collapse." As if on cue, the building shuddered ominously. Cracks appeared in the walls, and chunks of ceiling began to fall. Rora moved swiftly, its enhanced strength allowing it to support a collapsing beam with one hand while guiding people to safety with the other. "Evacuate the building," Rora commanded, its voice carrying an undeniable authority. "We will buy you time." As the medical team and security forces began ushering people out, Rora focused its regenerative abilities on the facility's structure. Its hands glowed with energy, temporarily fusing cracked support columns and reinforcing weakened areas. Ambassador Wayland and Counselor Thera watched in awe as Rora single-handedly prevented the immediate collapse of the building. The implications of what they were witnessing began to dawn on them. "This changes everything," Wayland muttered, his eyes never leaving Rora's form. Thara nodded solemnly. "The question is, for better or worse?" Outside the facility, the crowds reacted to the news of Rora's existence with a mix of wonder and fear. The evolutionary progressives cheered, seeing their dreams of human Evorn unity realized in physical form. In contrast, the Terran Purity Front's protests turned violent, their chants becoming more frenzied and threatening. As the last of the personnel evacuated, Rora stood in the center of the damaged facility. Its form flickered, momentarily separating into distinct Roy and Flora shapes before merging again. The internal struggle was evident on its face. Dr. Voss approached cautiously. "Rora, we need to run tests to understand what's happened to you." Rora nodded, its expression a complex mix of emotions. "We will cooperate, Dr. Voss, but first, we must ensure the safety of all those here." With that, Rora turned its attention to the gathering crowds outside. It could sense the rising tensions, the fear and anger bubbling beneath the surface. As it prepared to address the throng, Rora knew that its next actions would shape the future of human-Everin relations for generations to come. The hybrid being took a deep breath, its dual nature both a burden and a source of strength. It stepped forward, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that the true test of its existence was only beginning. Just beginning? Rora's eyes swept across the anxious faces surrounding them, sensing the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, her tone urgent and clipped. "Orbital defense network under attack. All personnel, initiate emergency protocols immediately." The room erupted into chaos. Dr. Voss and his team scrambled to secure vital equipment, while Ambassador Wayland and Counselor Thera exchanged looks of horror. Rora's form shimmered, briefly separating into Roy and Flora before merging again. They closed their eyes, their consciousness expanding outward. In an instant, they became aware of the unfolding crisis above Earth's atmosphere. "Commander Zorn," Rora said, their dual-tone voice filled with grim certainty. "He leads a radical Everin faction. They seek to capture us." Before anyone could respond, the ground shook violently. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the building. Captain Chen burst into the room, her uniform singed and a thin line of blood trickling from a cut above her eye. "We need to evacuate now. Zorn's forces have breached our orbital defenses. They'll be here soon." Rora nodded, their forms shifting subtly as they adapted to the escalating situation. "We understand. We will assist in the evacuation." As they spoke, Rora's body began to change more dramatically. Their skin hardened, taking on a metallic sheen that rippled with bioluminescent patterns. Muscles bulged and rearranged themselves, granting Rora enhanced strength and agility. Dr. Petrova gasped, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "Incredible! Your body is adapting to the threat in real time." "No time for analysis," Captain Chen snapped. "We need to move." The group rushed from the room, Rora taking point. As they navigated the chaotic corridors of the facility, Rora's enhanced senses allowed them to guide the others safely past areas of structural instability and pockets of acrid smoke. Outside, the sky burned with the aftermath of orbital combat. Streaks of light crisscrossed the atmosphere as Earth's remaining defenses engaged Zorn's ships. The ground trembled with the impact of debris and weapons fire. Rora's mind expanded further, touching the thoughts of millions. They staggered under the weight of so many terrified minds. "The city," they gasped. "Riots, panic. We must help them." Captain Chen grabbed Rora's arm. "Our priority is getting you to safety. We have a secure underground facility prepared." Rora's form flickered again, the internal struggle evident. "But the people? The best way to help them is to keep you out of Zorn's hands," Chen insisted. As they debated, a sleek Everin shuttle screamed overhead, its engines leaving a trail of superheated air. It touched down less than 100 meters away, its hull opening to disgorge a squad of heavily armed Everin soldiers. "Move!" Chen shouted, pushing the group toward a waiting transport. Rora's body reacted instinctively. Their arm elongated, forming a shield-like structure that deflected incoming energy blasts. With their other hand, they gestured sharply, sending out a wave of telekinetic force that knocked the approaching Everins off their feet. The group piled into the transport, Chen taking the controls. As they sped away from the facility, Rora's mind reached out, touching the thoughts of the attacking Everins. Their eyes widened in shock. "They believe they're saving their people," Rora said, their voice filled with anguish. "Zorn has convinced them we're a threat to Everin existence." Ambassador Wayland gripped the edge of his seat as Chen swerved to avoid a piece of falling debris. "Can you communicate with them? Make them understand?" Rora shook their head. "Too much fear, too much confusion. The link is unstable." As they raced through the streets, scenes of chaos unfolded around them. Crowds of humans ran in panic, some attacking Everin civilians in their midst. Rora's form pulsed with distress, their empathic abilities overwhelmed by the waves of fear and anger. Suddenly, Rora doubled over, their body contorting in ways that defied natural physics. Dr. Petrova rushed to their side, her medical scanner whirring. "The hybrid physiology is destabilizing," she reported, her voice tight with concern. "The stress is accelerating the evolutionary process. If we don't act soon, we could lose them both." Captain Chen's face hardened as she navigated through the panicked crowds. "ETA to the underground facility is 10 minutes. Can you keep them stable until then?" Before Dr. Petrova could answer, Rora's body erupted in a blinding flash of bioluminescence. Everyone in the transport recoiled, shielding their eyes. When the light faded, Rora stood changed once again. Their form had become more fluid, almost liquid in appearance, with swirling patterns of light dancing across their surface. "We are expanding," Rora said, their voice resonating strangely. "Our consciousness, it reaches further than ever before." Rora's eyes glazed over, their mind touching millions of others simultaneously. Humans and Everins alike suddenly found themselves experiencing flashes of each other's thoughts and emotions. The unexpected connection caused a momentary lull in the chaos, as people struggled to process the alien sensations. In orbit, Admiral Hawthorne's finger hovered over the launch control for the Starfall weapon. The sudden influx of Everin thoughts made him hesitate, his certainty wavering. Aboard his flagship, Commander Zorn experienced a similar moment of connection with human minds. For a brief instant, he saw the conflict through their eyes, feeling their fear and persistence. As the transport neared the underground facility, Rora's form continued to shift and change. Dr. Petrova worked frantically to stabilize their condition, but the hybrid's evolution seemed beyond her control. "We need to begin the stabilization procedure immediately upon arrival," she shouted over the din of the transport's engines. Captain Chen nodded grimly as she guided the vehicle into a concealed entrance. The gates sealed behind them, cutting off the sounds of the chaos outside. As they disembarked, Rora stumbled, their form fluctuating wildly. The walls of the facility seemed to ripple in response to their distress, the hybrid's powers affecting the very structure around them. Dr. Petrova and her team rushed Rora to the prepared stabilization chamber. As they worked to initiate the procedure, alarms blared throughout the facility. "Orbital bombardment detected," a computerized voice announced. "Impact imminent." The ground shook violently as Zorn's forces began their assault on the planet's surface. In the stabilization chamber, Rora's body arched in pain, their consciousness stretched to its limits. As Dr. Petrova activated the stabilization field, Rora's mind reached out one final time, touching the thoughts of both Commander Zorn and Admiral Hawthorne. In that moment of connection, the fate of two species hung in the balance, with Rora as the fulcrum upon which everything could turn. Pivot. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with Rora as the fulcrum upon which everything could change. As the stabilization field hummed to life, Rora's body began to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Dr. Petrova's hands flew over the controls, her eyes darting between the readouts and the writhing form before her. "Cellular stability at 47%, she called out, her voice tense. "We need to push it higher." The chamber shook as another bombardment struck the surface above. Captain Chen burst into the room, her face grim. "We've got incoming transmissions from both sides," she reported. "Admiral Hawthorne and Commander Zorn are demanding updates." Dr. Petrova didn't look up from her work. "Tell them we're in a critical phase. We can't afford any distractions." As if in response to her words, Rora's body suddenly arched, a blinding light emanating from within. The hybrid's form began to shift rapidly, cycling through a series of transformations that left the onlookers stunned. "Incredible," Dr. Petrova breathed, her fingers dancing across the controls. "It's as if Rora's physiology is searching for the perfect balance between human and Everin traits." The transformation slowed, and Rora's form settled into a more stable configuration. Its skin now shimmered with a subtle bioluminescence, while its musculature displayed a perfect blend of human and Everin characteristics. "Cellular stability at 82% and holding," Dr. Petrova announced, a note of triumph in her voice. Captain Chen nodded, then activated her comm unit. "This is Chen. Prepare for immediate transport. We're moving Rora to the shuttle bay." As the team worked to disconnect Rora from the stabilization chamber, the hybrid's eyes snapped open. Its gaze swept across the room, seeming to pierce through the very walls of the facility. "They're coming," Rora said, its voice a harmonious blend of Roy and Flora's tones. "Zorn's ultimatum. We must act quickly." Captain Chen's expression hardened. "How did you—" She shook her head, focusing on the task at hand. "Never mind. Can you walk?" Rora nodded, its movements fluid and graceful as it rose from the chamber. As they moved through the facility, Rora's skin pulsed with patterns of light, reacting to the tension in the air. They reached the shuttle bay just as another tremor shook the building. The ground crew scrambled to prepare the specialized transport vessel, its hull reinforced to withstand the dangerous journey through the war-torn skies. As they approached the shuttle, a commotion erupted near the bay doors. A group of protesters from the Terran Purity Front had breached the perimeter, their angry shouts echoing through the cavernous space. "Abomination!" one of them screamed, pointing at Rora. "Destroy it before it destroys us all!" The security team moved to intercept, but Rora held up a hand, stopping them. Its skin began to pulse with an intense rhythmic light. The protesters faltered, their eyes widening as they were caught in the mesmerizing display. Taking advantage of their momentary stupor, Captain Chen ushered Rora and the team into the shuttle. As the doors sealed behind them, Rora's light display faded, leaving the protesters blinking in confusion. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and they shot up through the opening bay doors. As they ascended, the full scale of the conflict became apparent. The sky was crisscrossed with energy weapon fire, while debris from destroyed ships and satellites burned up in the atmosphere. Inside the shuttle, Rora's body began to change once more. Its skin hardened, taking on a metallic sheen that rippled with complex patterns. Dr. Petrova, monitoring Rora's vitals, gasped in amazement. "It's adapting to space travel," she explained, her voice filled with wonder. "Developing protection against radiation and extreme temperatures." As they broke through the upper atmosphere, a tense silence fell over the shuttle. They were heading towards an abandoned space station that now served as neutral ground for this crucial meeting. Rora's eyes closed, its consciousness expanding outward. In the minds of key figures on both sides of the conflict, Ambassador Wayland, Counselor Thera, Admiral Hawthorne, and Commander Zorn, vivid images began to form. They saw a future where humans and Everins worked side by side, their complementary strengths allowing for unprecedented advancements. Cities where both species lived in harmony, their cultures blending and enriching each other. The vision was so powerful, so real, that for a moment the leaders forgot their animosity, caught up in the potential of what could be. As the shuttle docked with the space station, Rora's form shifted one final time. When the doors opened, the being that stepped out was a perfect synthesis of human and Everin features. Its presence radiated a sense of balance and harmony that seemed to affect everyone in the room. The circular chamber was divided equally between human and Everin delegations. As Rora took its place at the center, All eyes were fixed on the hybrid being. Ambassador Wayland cleared his throat, breaking the awed silence. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "we stand at a crossroads. The being before us represents not just a scientific marvel, but a bridge between our two species, a living proof of what we can achieve together." Counselor Thera stepped forward, her elegant, Everin features set in a determined expression. "We propose a joint initiative," she continued, "to study and learn from Rora, to use this opportunity to forge a lasting peace between our peoples." Commander Zorn's eyes narrowed, his skepticism evident. "Pretty words," he growled, "but what proof do we have that this hybrid is anything more than a dangerous anomaly?" Rora stepped forward, its gaze meeting Zorn's. Without a word, it extended its hands towards two injured individuals, an Everin soldier with a plasma burn and a human scientist with a deep gash on her arm. As the assembled delegates watched in astonishment, Rora's hands began to glow. The injuries on both the Everin and the human began to heal rapidly, leaving no trace of the wounds. The chamber erupted in murmurs of amazement and disbelief. Even Commander Zorn seemed taken aback, his stern expression faltering. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. A frantic voice came over the comm system. "Incoming missiles! Rogue Everin warship detected!" In the chaos that followed, Rora moved with otherworldly grace. It strode purposefully towards the airlock, its body already beginning to change in anticipation of what was to come. "Rora, wait!" Dr. Petrova called out, but the hybrid was already cycling through the airlock. As the assembled delegates crowded around the viewport, they witnessed a sight that would be etched into their memories forever. Rora, now glowing with an intense energy, positioned itself between the station and the incoming missiles. With a gesture, Rora created a shimmering field of energy. The missiles impacted the field, exploding in brilliant flashes that lit up the darkness of space. Not a single projectile made it past Rora's defense. Inside the station, human and Everin alike watched in awe as Rora single-handedly saved them all. As the hybrid being returned to the airlock, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted dramatically. Commander Zorn, his face a mix of emotions, stepped forward. I was wrong," he admitted, his voice gruff but sincere. "Perhaps there is more to be gained through cooperation than conflict." As Rora re-entered the chamber, Dr. Petrova rushed forward, her medical scanner whirring. Her eyes widened as she processed the readings. This is beyond anything we could have imagined," she breathed. "Rora's genetic structure, it contains solutions to medical issues that have plagued both our species for generations." The revelation sent a ripple of excitement through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Wayland and Counselor Thera exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing the monumental opportunity before them. As discussions resumed with newfound enthusiasm, plans for a joint human-Everin scientific commission began to take shape. The focus was clear: to study Rora's unique biology and harness its potential for the benefit of both species. Yet, unbeknownst to the hopeful delegates, a new challenge was already forming in the shadows. In secret laboratories on both Earth and Evora Prime, a group of scientists watched the unfolding events with keen interest. Their minds raced with possibilities, their ambitions unchecked by ethical constraints. As Rora stood at the center of the chamber, a symbol of unity and hope, these hidden figures began to plot. Their goal, to replicate and expand upon the miracle that was Rora, regardless of the consequences. The hybrid being, sensing the ripples of change spreading out from this moment, knew that its journey and the journey of both species was far from finished. New challenges, new wonders, and new dangers lay ahead, waiting to be confronted. The Joint Human-Everin Scientific Commission quickly set to work, eager to unlock the secrets held within Rora's unique genetic makeup. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, news of the hybrid being's role in brokering peace spread across both human and Everin societies. Rora became a symbol of unity, its image appearing in art galleries, on billboards, and even in children's educational materials. Scientists pored over data from the hybrid's cellular structure, while philosophers debated the implications of this new form of existence. Dr. Petrova found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, coordinating research teams and fielding endless questions from curious colleagues. She watched with a mix of pride and concern as Rora's fame grew, knowing that such attention often came with unforeseen consequences. One evening, as she reviewed the latest batch of test results in her lab, Captain Chen entered, her face etched with worry. "Doctor, we have a situation," Chen said, her voice low. "There's been a security breach. Someone's accessed Rora's genetic data." Dr. Petrova's blood ran cold. "How? Our systems are supposed to be impenetrable." Chen shook her head. "We're still investigating, but it looks like an inside job. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were after." As they discussed the implications of the breach, neither noticed the subtle change in the air. In a hidden laboratory on a distant moon, Dr. Alexei Kuznetsov smiled as he examined the stolen genetic samples. "At last," he murmured, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "With this, we'll create beings that will reshape the galaxy." Weeks passed, and Rora continued its work with the Scientific Commission, unaware of the dark experiments taking place in secret. But as Dr. Kuznetsov's work progressed, Rora began to experience strange sensations. During a routine meeting with Ambassador Wayland and Counselor Thera, Rora suddenly stumbled, clutching its head. "Rora, what's wrong?" Thera asked, reaching out to steady the hybrid. Rora's eyes flickered with an inner light. "Pain, confusion, so many voices," it gasped. "Something is very wrong." Meanwhile, in Dr. Kuznetsov's lab, the first batch of hybrid clones stirred to life. Unlike Rora, these beings were unstable, their powers fluctuating wildly. One of them, a male with steel-gray skin and glowing red eyes, let out a piercing scream that shattered every piece of glass in the room. Kuznetsov watched in fascination as the hybrid's form shifted and warped. "Magnificent," he whispered, even as alarms blared around him. Back on Unity Station, Rora's distress had caught the attention of the entire council. Dr. Petrova ran a series of scans, her frown deepening with each result. "It's as if Rora's telepathic abilities have suddenly expanded," she explained. "It's picking up signals from somewhere else." Captain Chen, who had been quietly investigating the data breach, stepped forward. "I think I know where," she said grimly. "We've traced the stolen genetic data to a research facility on Titan's shadow." Commander Zorn, who had been working closely with the human forces since the peace accord, growled softly. "Titan's shadow? That moon's been off limits for years. Who would dare set up a lab there?" As they debated their next move, reports began flooding in from several outer colonies. Strange beings with fluctuating powers were causing chaos, their very presence warping the fabric of reality around them. Rora, its face a mask of willpower, stood up. "I must go to them," it declared. "They are lost, confused. I can help them find balance." Dr. Petrova protested. "Rora, it's too dangerous. We don't know what these beings are capable of." But Rora was resolute. "They are part of me, in a way. I bear responsibility for their existence, even if indirectly. I must try to reach them." As preparations were made for Rora's mission, Captain Chen assembled a task force. Dr. Petrova worked tirelessly to adapt the stabilization technology for field use, while Commander Zorn readied a fleet of ships to provide support. The journey to the affected colonies was tense. Rora spent much of the time in deep meditation, its form shimmering with patterns of light as it reached out with its mind, seeking contact with the unstable hybrids. As they approached the first colony, the true scale of the situation became clear. Buildings lay in ruins, their structures twisted into impossible shapes. In the center of the devastation stood a group of hybrid beings, their forms constantly shifting between human and Everin features. Rora disembarked from the ship, its every movement radiating calm purpose. As it approached the rogue hybrids, their erratic movements slowed, their attention fixed on this strange being that seemed so familiar, yet so different. "I know your pain," Rora spoke, its voice resonating on multiple frequencies. "The confusion, the fear. But you are not alone. Let me show you the way to balance." The hybrid beings hesitated, their forms flickering between aggression and curiosity. Rora reached out, both physically and mentally, creating a bridge between their fragmented consciousnesses. As Captain Chen coordinated the evacuation of remaining civilians and Dr. Petrova prepared her equipment, Roar initiated a profound telepathic exchange with the unstable hybrids. Images flowed between them, memories of Roy and Flora's individual lives, the process of their melding, and Rora's journey of self-discovery. The colony was bathed in an otherworldly light as Rora guided the hybrids through a process of self-realization and physiological stabilization. Onlookers watched in awe as the chaotic beings gradually settled into more balanced forms, their powers no longer running wild. With the immediate crisis averted, the task force turned its attention to the source of the problem. Using information gleaned from the stabilized hybrids, they pinpointed the location of Dr. Kuznetsov's hidden laboratory on Titan's shadow. As they prepared for the final confrontation, Rora stood at the viewport of the command ship, its gaze fixed on the starry expanse before them. The hybrid being knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in the complex relationship between humans and Everans, with challenges and opportunities yet to be discovered.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.